BibleWorm is on hiatus for the summer. We'll be back with new narrative lectionary episodes beginning August 31st for regular listeners and August 24th for subscribers. In the meantime, we hope you'll enjoy this episode from our Creation Care series, which first aired in summer 2024.
BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week, we start our summer series on creation care with the creation text, Genesis 1. For such a familiar text, it sure did open up a lot of questions for us. How should we think about our place so late in the proverbial lineup of creation? What does it mean to us that God has already issued a commandment directly to the animals before we were even here? That we're created on a Friday afternoon as everyone is sort of closing up shop for the Sabbath instead of on a busy Monday morning? And as we try to inhabit what it is to be created in the image of God, how might God's disposition toward the created world in the 5.5 days before we arrived help us find our way? Thanks for being with us. Hey, Bobby.
Hey! My voice did something weird right there. I think I might be entering puberty.
That should be my goal every time I greet you, to say hi in some kind of exciting way that will make your voice do a new and
that reminds me of that time then when you used to tell me that I looked like a Muppet or I sounded like a Muppet. I can't remember. And then I would go like,
in some way reminded me of a Muppet.
It was that fuzzy.
You were also wearing like a fuzzy purple fleece or something.
Fuzzy fleece.
Like that.
I still have
Very
that fleece. Yeah.
Muppety thing.
I have these undershirts that I wear that they're like really old, raggedy undershirts, and I sleep in them. But my daughter calls them my stretch out shirts because I don't care if she stretches them out. So she like I don't know, she'll like crawl inside my shirt and stuff like while I'm sleeping. And then one day she asked me like how long I've had them, and I was like, I don't know. Like I think I might have had those undershirts for like 25 years or something. Like I know it was I think it was before graduate school, even like before I knew you. Like
those are some high quality. They don't make undershirts like that anymore.
They don't. They're my favorite shirts though, cuz
that's amazing.
I get lots of snuggles.
Aww.
Anyway, this was probably not what you were expecting we were going to talk about just right now.
No, it's not, but one never knows what will happen. One never knows what will happen.
It's true. It is true.
Well, the reason I greeted you with such like particular effervescence today is that it's time for something new. We have concluded the regular year series of the Narrative Lectionary, and this is our first conversation that is part of our summer series.
Yes, it is. I'm excited about this series.
I am also excited about this series and a little bit, I want to say daunted by it. I don't know.
Yeah.
So our topic is creation care.
Yes.
And we have chosen texts from across the Hebrew Bible that relate in some way to creation. And they're not all the texts that you would say, oh, this is the one that's about creation, or this is the one that's about the environment. Like some of them are a little surprising.
They are. We were in a mood when we picked these texts, I think. It's been a little while ago. Like it's long enough ago that I don't quite remember the process. But
I mean, I think one of the challenges for me in taking on a topic like this is we have to make it new again.
Right.
Like this is a conversation that I know has not been going on forever, but has been going on for a lot of my adult reading years of the biblical text. And so we have to get some new life into it. And I think part of that is expanding the texts that we think ought to be part of this conversation. And so I'm excited about.
I'm excited about it too. Yeah, this series came as an opportunity for collaboration with Spirit and Truth Publishing. And they are doing a series, they call it Learning Together, Created to Care, which has basically is a focus on Genesis 1. And they have a 5-week, or I think it is, series that could be used in Sunday schools for children or intergenerational, or it could be used as a vacation Bible school. And they said, what do you think about this as a text? And our response was sort of, this is a beautiful text to start with and a great text for kids and intergenerational study. But, in that BibleWorm way, like, we need to complexify the conversation. So we're going to start with the Genesis 1 text today, as you know, and this is the text that Spirit and Truth series will be focused on. And then for the next 5 weeks after this, we're going to step over into Job, a little bit into Psalms, spend a little time in Leviticus, and then in Ezekiel. And just trying to stir up, like, what ideas, what if we read a different kind of text and think about it through this lens of creation and human relationship and responsibility for creation, what kinds of things can we see? I'm pretty jazzed about it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about it too. And I was doing some reading the other day that of a scholar named Ellen Davis, who is at Duke. And so she's really sort of in my head on this subject. And one of the things that she said was that when she started to write on this subject matter, which is particularly near and dear to her heart, she's a Hebrew Bible scholar and has focused a lot of her career on this angle, I guess, was her realization that she no longer felt like she had to cherry pick texts to get to the subject of land and creation and and humans' connection to land. It's more, it's everywhere. It is interwoven into so many things. We don't always see it. And so we're trying to find some fresh eyes.
Yes. Yeah. Were you reading her agrarian reading of the Hebrew Bible, or I forget exactly what that book is called?
I did, yes. I read some of that. And then I also was listening to an interview that she did with Krista Tippett a number of years ago.
Yeah.
That also included some poetry from Wendell Berry that was really just
nice.
A beautiful coming together of their ideas.
Yeah.
So, okay, all of this is true. And today we're reading the creation text. You can't even say that. There's two, but we're starting at the beginning. We're reading Genesis 1:1.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, if you say to people walking down the street, what is the creation text in the Bible? If they don't cross the street and run away, they will say this one. Let there be a light. That's this one. Yeah. Yes. So it's the creation story in that sense, for sure.
Yeah. And that presents its own kind of challenge because in some ways it's so familiar and we're trying to encounter it differently at this moment in our lives, at this moment in the world, and just see what we can stir up.
Yes.
You ready to stir things up? Do you
want
to say anything about this text? There's nothing that came before it, so in the text anyway.
Let's just dig in. Like, there's some background that we might want to talk about at some point, but I think let's just create it out of nothing.
Oh dear. Okay. We'll get to that in a minute. Beautiful. So I am reading from the JPS or the NJPS. I actually don't know which one it is. And I am picking up in chapter 1, verse 1.
You start at the very beginning.
Okay, actually, I'm glad you did that because you have a lovely singing voice, Bobby, but also because one of the thoughts that Ellen Davis put in my head was that this is a liturgical poem. And we don't necessarily read it thinking of it as poetry.
Yeah.
But I am going to try to think about it as poetry and just sort of see how that resonates for me.
That's beautiful. And you got there from my little Sound of Music riff.
Yeah, it was a good job, Bobby.
Right on, thanks.
You integrated the arts.
That's what I was going for. That's what I was doing.
Work.
Yeah.
Okay, Genesis 1:1. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning, a first day. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water." God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters he called the seas. And God saw that this was good. Okay, I'm going to pause us there, with the note in my mind that this translation uses a masculine for the God that maybe that maybe I will switch out occasionally in my reading.
Yes.
Bobby, we said we're going to begin at the very beginning.
Yes.
Which we did, of the canon.
We did.
And whenever you are telling a story or a history or anything, I feel like one of the biggest questions is you have to decide where it starts, where to begin. How
yes.
far back do we go?
Yes.
Where does this story begin? Or what does it not include? You mentioned before creation from nothing, which is a way that people have read this text.
Yeah.
But not the only way.
Not the only way. I'm a little quippy, So there are two ways of reading that beginning of verse 1. And I in my understanding of Hebrew grammar, they are both defensible. And so you've sort of from the very beginning, you have some options about how to read. In the Christian tradition anyway, you'll have to fill me in about Jewish tradition. This was for a very long time understood to talk about, it was a full sentence, right? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, period.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was formlessness and void. If you read it that way, then it seems to be that this begins when there was nothing. God was all there was. And then God created, and what God first created was formlessness and void, like tohu vavohu, the watery chaos, and then God shaped it. You can also read this as a temporal clause, which is how I typically prefer to read it, even though it is technically a heresy in my tradition, which is to say, when God began to create, there already was something that God did not create. And so there was this sort of chaotic, formlessness and void is the translation. Is that the translation you read?
Yeah, unformed and void.
Yeah, CEB, without shape or form. Hebrew tohu vavohu, which I love that. I just love the way that feels in your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
If you read it that way, then what God has done is take some sort of shapeless, uninhabitable something that was already there and create it out of that chaotic mess and habitable world. So then God is a God who makes what is unlivable livable, or who takes what is chaotic and makes it productive for life, both human and otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So I lean to the temporal clause, and if you look at other ancient Near Eastern creation texts, they often begin with this idea of when the gods began, there was already water. And so I tend to read Genesis that way, but I think it can reasonably be read the other. What are your thoughts about that?
I also tend to read it as a temporal clause. It is not a heresy in my tradition to do that, although it is recognized that English translations have done different things with this. And some read the second verse, the earth being unformed and void, as sort of the continuation of that. Like it just starts with a really long temporal clause.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I guess this question would arise in either case, but what sort of came to my mind this year was that this is not the origin story of everything. There's no origin story of God. We're not going from nothing existed to now everything exists.
Yes.
As you were saying, some of it is sort of like a shaping of what's there and sort of aligning it in the direction of life. And then some of it we'll see is actually making new things in the space that's created.
That's right. The shaping and forming of things that are already there. In the Christian tradition, one cannot at least in the main line of theological tradition, talk about a time when there was not God. So it's actually not possible to talk about the origin of God, because God is the originate. So I don't even know how quite to think about that. But yes, otherwise we're talking about the forming of things.
Yes. No, I think that's right. And we, I don't know Jewish stories about that question either. It's more just that we're not supposed to think about that.
Yeah. Stop thinking. Don't think.
Stop it. Yeah. I can't help but, and these sections where God does something and then sees that it is good. It almost like I have this image in my head of like an artist doing something and then stepping back to see how it did that work.
I love that image, Amy. And there's nothing in here where God ever steps back and looks at it and says, nope, it needs a little more something over here. There's the sense in which when God creates, God is creating the way God wishes it to be. And so things are from the beginning good. At least that's how I read this. And so there's there's this goodness that permeates the created world.
Yeah.
In and of itself. God has declared it so, and God has created it so. I think that's really important.
I think that part of what I like in thinking about God as an artist, and this, I guess, reveals something about how I think about art, is that it feels like it is unfolding in real time. Like, not that God had in God's mind this is what the end is going to look like, but do the next thing that seems right and then step back and look at it and then do the next thing. Like it feels very alive.
Yes.
To me.
Yes.
It feels very alive to me.
I love that. And the other thing that I notice here, and it's going to become important like a month from now, is God calls the light into being and then looks at the light and sees how good the light is. The darkness God does not create. And God does not call the darkness good. And so I don't quite know what I want to do with that other than just notice it. But there are things that God is making, and those things are named to be good, and things that God does not. And I don't know whether darkness is a thing or a lack of a thing, right? But God, only some things are being called good, and those are things that God has brought into being in some way.
I think yes, that's right. Not just I think that's right. That is right. And another thing that I noticed was that God preserves the presence of the darkness.
Yes.
Like creates the distinct presence of darkness and light is retained and important. It's not just that light is all the time, or you put out a certain amount of light and it kind of averages out to some kind of dusky situation or whatever. And I'm not totally sure what to do with that, but I think the darkness is important or the contrast between light and darkness is important.
Yes.
But
there's this moment in this text where there's this, God has to separate the light and the darkness. So God says, let there be light, and then there is light, and then God has to separate. So you get the sense that there is this kind of murky, duskiness that God then says, no, we don't need it to be always kind of dark and kind of light. We do need that separation.
Yeah.
So I think the separation itself is important here.
Yeah. And then in some ways, it's different, but a little bit of a similar thing in, at first we get this image of the water that seems to just be over everything. The water is everywhere. It's all through what is now the air. It's all over the earth. It's just a big, sort of chaotic water situation. Yeah. And the water is preserved. That God doesn't get rid of any water, but it is moved around.
Yes.
It's moved around. And there's actually the words in my head in the English translation, I don't even know if it's what's in here, but is separated the water from the water. Like God separated the water from the water. And there's a Jewish thinker named Aviva Zornberg who talks about the way that there's some pain and sacrifice in separation, even necessary separation. And there's a midrash that the water below is really sad to be separated from the water above. Yeah. And I think this is one of the few places where it doesn't say that the separation is good.
It doesn't. Nothing is good. Yeah, in that little sequence right there.
But maybe necessary.
Yes. Nothing is good on the second day, which is
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Nothing is good on the second day.
One of the things that I also think is interesting, so that word, I think it was expanse in your translation. It's dome in mine. The sky. The Hebrew word there, rakia, is sometimes used of like a hammered out metal bowl. And
Yeah.
so like, I mean, I don't think they actually thought there was a bowl in the sky, but like that was the closest the Hebrew language could get to explaining what's there. And then when you're talking about the separation of the waters, there is water below and water above. So the way that they're picturing it is that there is water, like if you think about what's beyond the sky, it's chaos water up there, which is like if you try to think about that, like if you try to inhabit that, like that's a little scary. Like there's chaos water up there.
Yeah.
And you know, in the Noah story in chapter 6-8, God opens the little windows in the sky and lets that chaos water come back. And so there's this really interesting, like God is carving out a livable bubble of air surrounded by water that could come undone. And so we tend, at least I tend to read this story as like God made the earth and the earth always will be. But it's actually God created a habitable space in the midst of chaos, which always could fall apart.
Yes. Yes, that needs constant care and attention. And there's a fantastic book called Creation and the Persistence of Evil by John Levinson that digs really deep into this theme and the way that it comes up repeatedly in the biblical text. And this is where it starts.
Yes.
You know, I mentioned before that maintaining that distinction between darkness and light, but like the presence of both of them seemed important. There's also a I guess, rabbinic understanding of the word for heaven, shamayim, as being a combination of the word aish for fire, meaning like the sun, and mayim. And they talk about how it is a daily miracle. Oh, yes. What did I say?
You shouldn't say.
Like
you were talking to me because I know what mayim means, but, you know, in BibleWorm world, there may be one or two people who don't know Hebrew.
There may be one or two people. Yes, I apologize. So a combination of aish meaning fire and mayim meaning water. And it is understood to be sort of like a daily ongoing miracle that the fire, the sun, and the water, the rain, can coexist in this same space together because the sun should evaporate the water and the water should put out the sun. But somehow they don't.
That is beautiful. The rabbis were amazing.
They had a lot of things to say about a lot of things.
They did.
Some of them are pretty crazy.
Some of them are, but that's just a beautiful thought. Like, I could spend days thinking about that. Let's have a day-long BibleWorm where we just talk about.
Or just think about that. Meditate on the coexistence.
It'll just be silence. We'll go, every once in a while.
Okay, so last act of creation in this little chunk is, again, moving the waters around.
Yes.
This time to create dry land. So I guess we're picturing before that there's a sky, there's breathable air, but the entire earth is covered with water.
Right.
So we need to move things to the side so that there will be dry land.
Right. And to me, I don't know if it's important, but it's not said that God creates the dry land here. It says that God pulls the waters back so that the dry land can appear.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Because my question for you was, does this feel like a parallel act to the last act of creation? Like exactly as you said, what God does is gather the water into one area or a couple of areas to make space for something that seems like it was already there.
Yeah. You know, I'm realizing as we're talking that I sort of am making this move from water to chaos in my head that may or may not be a move that just everybody would make. So I think water, yes, and that's what this text is talking about. But as you well know, in the ancient Near East, water is kind of this chaotic presence that can be quite destructive. Tiamat is the ocean goddess in the Babylonian tradition. In the Hebrew Bible, you get Leviathan, the sea monster who causes, lots of problems. And so when you see water in places water shouldn't be, to me, that symbolizes the presence of chaos. I think Levinson, in that book you were mentioning, did I say something weird?
No, I'm laughing because it made me think of plumbing problems.
Oh.
But yes. This is honestly one of my favorite subjects to talk about in the biblical text.
Yeah.
And so I'm like holding myself back because we could talk about it forever.
Yes. But here again,
Yes.
there's an act of restraining chaos so that habitable land can now appear. So God did it once to create habitable air, and now God does it again to create. And so now these two acts of restraining chaos water have made it possible for life on earth.
Yes. And it is chaos water, I agree with you. And also it's needed water. God doesn't banish the water. We need water, but we need the water not to be everywhere.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Okay. We stopped ourselves in the middle of the third day.
A little lunch break.
Because now living things start to sprout up. So I wanted to pause before that. So is there anything else you want to say about this first? This first part feels a little bit like moving the furniture around.
It does. Yes. Let's get some plants in this place.
Let's get some plants in this place. Good.
Hi, I'm Terry Peterson, minister of St. John's Church of Scotland in Gourock, west of Glasgow on the Scottish coast. And I am the liturgy writer for BibleWorm, which means I get to spend a lot of time listening to Bobby and Amy, and that is a great joy. It is fascinating to hear them read and talk through stories I thought I knew pretty well, since I'm starting my third time through the narrative lectionary now. I always come away with more ideas than I can fit into a liturgy or a sermon, and working with them has deepened my own spiritual life as I write liturgy that follows the contours of their conversations. I appreciate that they don't shy away from the difficult parts, and that they always find connections between these ancient texts and our contemporary life. And it's fun for me to work those connections into liturgy that empowers worshiping communities to speak to and about God in new ways. If you join the BibleWorm Patreon at the Liturgy Worm level or higher, you'll have access to those liturgies and prayers that you can use or adapt, as well as early access to the podcast. Or there are other levels with different benefits, including Bible studies, access to the BibleWorm Collaborative Discussion Group, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast to help Bobby and Amy continue creating this incredible resource for people of faith around the world. And now back to this week's podcast.
So I'm picking up in verse 11. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees, and every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years, and they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser light to dominate the night and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fourth day. God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and increase, fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. Okay. So let's go back to the plants.
Okay.
This whole section feels just like quite a big thing has happened now. We've gone from sort of moving the waters around and, I guess creating light is a big thing. Fine.
It's big. Yeah.
But these are things that are alive.
Right. There was no life, and then now suddenly there's life everywhere.
Right.
Almost everywhere. Yes.
Now that the conditions have been aligned in a way that allows for it.
Yes.
Bobby, in the description of the plants, there is such a strong focus on seeds. What do you make of that?
I'm so glad you asked that question that way. What I was thinking about is when God wants plants, God says, let the earth grow plant life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then the CEB says the earth produced plant life. And so here you have, it's not that God made plants. It's that God invited plants to come forth from the earth, and the earth said, yeah. So here you have creation kind of responding to God's invitation. The earth is almost like a character here in some sense. Like the earth was not capable of producing without God's invitation, but as soon as God says, hey, why don't you bring forth some plants? The earth says, boom. And then that seed question I love, because now those plants have seeds, and so they are then able to keep creating life from within themselves. And then the command that the animals get later, be fruitful and multiply, here, so the animals are able to contribute to life as well. And so you get this sort of sense that all of creation, once they are invited by God, can produce life. And that's a really lovely idea.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you started that by pointing out that God doesn't exactly create the. Yes, God offers the invitation for plants to sprout forward. Although it reads so nicely in Hebrew. It's like God says, "Let the earth." I don't know. Vegetation or something like it's this like do its thing.
Yeah.
Let it. It's
be
going to
its true
do
self.
Yeah. It's going to do its thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. And this is not singular, as you were saying. This is meant to continue. And so it's something has been set in motion. The conditions were set up. The invitation was given, and now a potentially ongoing renewing system has been started. Absolutely. I also notice here that the pacing is changing a little bit in that we're getting a little more variety within the category of things. If we had light before, now we have different kinds of vegetation that are mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So then we can come back in a minute if you want to the lights in the expanse of the sky. Okay. But what really has drawn my attention here is thinking about looking at verse 20 and onward about the living creatures that come from the waters. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering in particular about what you just mentioned with the vegetation. God does start with the invitation. Let the waters bring forth.
Yes.
And then it also says God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures.
Yes.
How do you make sense of those two things together?
No, that's a really good question. The word created, by the way, throughout this text, bara in Hebrew, is never used of anyone other than God. So this is some sort of divine prerogative to create in this way. Because God does invite, let the waters, and then God creates. And so to me, what it points to is this kind of partnership of creation. So it is not simply that the sea brings forth sea creatures of its own accord, but it does, like God and the sea are sort of like on the creation team. And so God says, bring forth sea creatures, and then God enables that to happen, or maybe makes that happen. But just that language of let the sea, like the invitation is yet still there. Mm-hmm. And so God is treating the sea as a partner, I think, even if what God ultimately doing is saying, here's a blue whale, let me plop it in there. Like God is still like talking about
God's
to the
3D
sea.
printer. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I really love that you brought out in the last example that the vegetation really sprouts forth from the earth as the text tells it to us. Because the lack of any explicit statement that God created it there and the presence of it here made me wonder differently, I guess, about whether or how God is sort of interwoven into the environment in some way. Like how different. I'm not trying to put forth like a fully, God is only nature. God is entirely in the natural forces in the world. Like I'm not trying to put forth any particular theology, really.
Right.
I wonder whether it's a totally clear distinction of what God has created and what has sprung forth from God's creation.
Yes.
Or if God is so interwoven as, like I'm thinking of language of like God as source and also creation as source.
Yes.
And just wondering if how much I can blur that line in my mind.
Yes.
Without sort of falling off a cliff.
No, I love that. I love that, and I love it when you walk close to the cliff because I think there's some good things that come out of there for sure. As you were talking, I was thinking like two things that stand out to me in this text is this is a text about relationship between God and creation, and it's an ongoing relationship that's not simply like whatever the watchmaker God kind of out of philosophy that God sort of sets things in motion. So that notion of interweaving I really love. And you can't always distinguish, even here in this text, like what exactly is the relationship of the creation from God and the creation from the environment itself. The language of source of life for God, but also source of life, plants have seeds, animals reproduce, and so on. Like, I like that. Like animals are doing in sort of smaller form, and plants as well, what God is doing in large form. And so the originary source, but not the only source. Like God is what makes it possible for these other creatures to create. But there is a sense in which these other creatures now do create life. And so I think that I love the sort of mixing of those and not wanting to pull them apart too clearly.
Yeah, it made me, I think maybe that talking about source is making me think of another rabbinic story that I can't remember where exactly I read it, but it's a, I don't know, story or saying about someone who buys their wheat from the market and sort of depicts them as like that it's a really sort of hollowed out way to get your caloric needs met. Whereas someone who gets their wheat from the earth is like a nursing infant or is, connected to its source, which suggests to me that even back then there was some sense that there is something about the earth that has godly sourciness woven into it.
Yes.
You like that language?
Godly sourciness. I love it. That's beautiful.
I'm wondering too, Bobby, about the blessing that God offers here. So God didn't bless the plants explicitly. God hasn't blessed the other stuff. But here it says that God blesses the animals of the sea and of the sky with this, blessing that we all probably are familiar with, be fertile and increase. And I found myself this time wanting to read it in the sort of language that is more typically used for a blessing when it's spoken in English, at least in my context, which is more like, may you be fruitful and multiply.
Oh, that's interesting because I want to read it the exact opposite.
Tell me. No, please tell me.
No, I love that. I love that language of may this happen, may this be true for you. The reason that I said it that way is because God has invited things previously in this text. Let there be light is a cohortative. Let the earth bring forth. Here is the first commandment in the Bible. Peru. It's an imperative. And it is given to animals. We tend to think God commands human beings because we are anthropocentric by nature, many of us. And so to say like God actually has a relationship of blessing and commandment with animals, fish and birds at this moment, in which there aren't even humans in the picture yet.
Right.
And so those creatures don't need human beings to convey blessing or to instruct. Like they have a direct connection to the Creator. That's why I like the imperative.
No, I think that's really, I think in some ways it could be either way you could get there, although yes, it's not a cohortative form. But I like the idea that they have a full relationship with God, the Creator, that yes, the humans are going to get a particular job here. We're going to read about that in a minute, but it doesn't, but it needs to be understood in this broader context.
Yes.
That, there was already a lot going on here when you arrived, and people had pre-existing relationships.
Yes.
There were pre-existing relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you read the blessing as separate then from the imperative? Like there's God blessed them. We don't get words for that. And then
that's a good question, because that's not really a blessing, is it? It's an instruction. I think I do read it that way in my heart of hearts, as it's God blessed them and instructed them. Yeah. But I don't know that I have a very strong backing for that. It's just how I intuitively kind of grasp it.
I skipped over a whole section in here, Bobby, because I was so excited to get to that.
Yes.
So excited to get to that fish and the birds. It is interesting, and I don't know if jarring is the right word, but to read about the importance of sort of marking time within this system. Like it feels like a categorically different kind of thing that we need to be able to count days and have set times of years.
I mean, the way that I have tended to read that is that the earth moves according to cycles. And so, especially in an ancient world, like knowing what time it was, even just for agricultural purposes, was really important. You needed to know when to plant and when to harvest and all of those things. And so this is kind of being built in the sort of timekeeping function of nature itself. But there is sort of also a like sacred times, like it's sort of anticipating not just an agrarian calendar, but also the times for worship are also built in to creation before there are people inhabiting the earth.
Yeah, I can't even get to that second place yet, but I can see how that is. I can see how that is like if the reader knows, it's sort of baked
right.
in
Yeah.
there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Somebody living through this moment may not have known that, but I mean, that does say sacred seasons in the text, and so
that's
the text
right.
is anticipating that.
But it is also interesting to think, we're about to get to the land animals and the humans. And it's interesting to look back and say, like, well, in order for humans to be able to, however we want to understand their role in relation to the natural world, they're going to need to be able to keep time.
Yes.
And so, I think of keeping time as something much different because I have a schedule that is only very loosely tied to the natural world, to my detriment. But their work is going to be very closely tied to it. So these will be signs for them about what it's time to do next.
Yes. I think that's lovely. And if we're thinking about, I'm anticipating a little bit from there, but if we're thinking about creation care, then the sort of distancing of human beings from the actual cycles of the earth that are created on the fourth day of creation or whatever day we were on.
Yes.
When there was no human being, like paying attention to those cycles is built into the system. And so if we are unaware of what time it is, then that's a problem.
Yeah. I think about that often at the grocery store when they're like, you can buy strawberries in February or whatever they're shipped from, wherever they are. You can buy tomatoes all year round. And I have been trying to stick with things that are more in season, and I don't always, but yeah, it's a funny thing that we've done in being able to get some version of the foods we want all the time.
And we've done the same thing with light and dark. Like it can be light kind of anytime you want it to be.
That's true. Ooh, that just spooked me out. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say on this section, or shall we move on to our land creatures?
I am ready for a wallaby.
Okay, let's get to the wallabies. I'm picking
I
up
don't know
in
why
verse-
a wallaby is my go-to land animal, it would seem.
Is that a real animal? I shouldn't
Yeah, it's
ask
like-
you that.
it's like a
you
little
have a child
marsupial.
who's really interested in animals.
She's super
so-
into servals. I don't know if she knows about wallabies. They're related to kangaroos.
Well, this is their moment to shine. Picking up in verse 24. God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things of the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth." And God created man in his image. In the image of God, God created him. Male and female, God created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth." God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on earth, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food." And it was so. And God saw all that God had made, and found it very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. The heaven and the earth were finished, and all their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work that God had been doing, and God ceased on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that God had done. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. Okay. So, cattle, creeping things, wild beasts. It's interesting to me that first of all, that these are the three categories of land creatures that are named. And then also that the text sort of goes out of its way to make it clear that it's not that these are all the same. Like these are everything of its kind, like everything of this type of creature.
Yes.
Do you think it's worth reflecting for a minute on why these are the categories? Like how expansive or inclusive is this, or what kind of, I don't know, worldview or integration into the world do these categories suggest?
One of the things that I was thinking about is, you were talking about this text being a liturgy. And so one of the ways this text is structured is that days 1 to 3, and then days 4 to 6, you get light on day 1, luminaries day 4, you get air and sea day 2, fish and birds day 5, land day 3, land creatures day 6. So you've got this sort of paralleling of environments to creatures, which is pretty expansive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I love the fact that creeping things are included here, because I take that to mean like insects.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't think about insects that much. I mean, I do, but they annoy me mostly. But
Yeah.
like a whole lot of the world's life, animated life anyway, are insects. And so I think this text is really trying to get at all of that. And in the sea, it was talking about the sea monsters, like even the life that maybe you kind of wish wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
God is still responsible for that. So I read this as pretty expansive. I don't know quite what to do with the categories exactly, but I think it's trying to reach pretty far.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think it's got this sort of like herd animals and wild animals and bugs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's pretty good attunement to what kinds of creatures walk the earth.
And you could see that human beings might tend to want to be just interested in the herd animals because they're the ones that are sort of most useful for us in various ways. But wild animals and bugs are equally much, even wild animals, especially in the world in which this text is first being written and read, kind of dangerous and scary.
Yeah.
And so even the scary animals are part of God's creation.
Yes. I love the way that you put that there are animals that are most quote unquote useful to us, but the text isn't overly much interested
It's not.
in
Yeah.
that. That's
Yep.
not its orientation. I don't know why I was surprised by this. I probably shouldn't have been, but that it just goes right on from the wild animals to the humans. Like we don't
It
get our
does.
own day. Like we're just we're not lumped into the same, creative voicing as
Right.
as the animals, but
And the text pauses in the middle of day 6 to say how good the land creatures are before it ever gets to the creation of human beings.
yeah.
And so they are said to be good of their own accord. So there's that little tiny break. But you're right. It's like God created land animals in the morning, a
Yeah.
little break,
And
created
humans.
humans in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like we're about to get to, some of the more, I want to say harrowing, but maybe that's a dramatic word, language.
Tipping your hand a little bit.
I know about the role of humans in this whole system. But before we get there, I just want to hold on to, we are in essence a land-dwelling creature.
Yes.
At this point in the text, that is.
That is what we are. And we get the commandment, be fruitful and multiply, which is the same, that much of our instruction is also what land animals and also what fish and birds have. So we are our innate creatureliness is very much in this text, even while it's going to move on and try to distinguish us in some ways.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Although strangely, it does not explicitly tell that animals to be fruitful and multiply. I can't make any sense of that, to be honest. I don't know if they're. I don't know what to do with that.
No, you're right.
Editorial error. I have nothing to say about that.
I have nothing to say about that. I never noticed that before, actually. Can you imagine just like a bunch of little celibate squirrels out there? God didn't tell us to be fruitful and
then when you
multiply.
run out of squirrels, you run out of squirrels. It's fine. Maybe they live forever. Zombie squirrels. Okay, Amy, stop. Bobby, what in the name of all things holy does it mean that humans are created in our image, God's image?
Are you interested in the hour or the image or all of the above?
Oh, all of the above. No, I didn't mean the plural Elohim. I mean,
yeah. So people notice that hour in our image, and there's a lot of things one can do with it.
Yes.
And many of them simply grammatical explanations, which I think are helpful. One of the ways of reading it is that, elsewhere in the Bible, we see God existing in a sort of divine council. Like Isaiah 6 is kind of the clearest place where God says, who will go for us? And so there's like other divine beings, maybe angels or however you want to think about it. And so that's one way of reading that us, which I think is fairly useful, but not the only one. What I like about that is that it suggests that God is not a solitary being.
Yeah.
God is always God in relationship. And I think that's important. That in God's image, people have read this a million ways. Mm-hmm. And we could rehearse those if we had, we could do another day-long podcast.
We do another day-long podcast.
Where we rehearse
we do several
those.
On this. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think is important is that the whole human being is created in God's image. So I think it's a mistake if you put that in like one aspect, like our intelligence or whatever. Like I don't want to pull it apart like that. I want to say the human being in themselves is created in God's image. I also think like the male and female are in God's image is important. So there's whatever you think about the binary of genders stated there's a sense in which the genders are equally created in God's image and they have equal value. And I think that's important. The image itself, the way that I have settled on that in my own reading is that in the ancient Near East, the king of Mesopotamia, the king of Egypt, were often described as the image of God on earth, which basically meant God's agent on the earth, God's viceroy. So when you look, even though, the Mesopotamians never elevated their kings to actual divine status, you would still say that that king, that human king, is God's image on the earth, by which, that is, God's presence is mediated on the earth through the king. If you read it that way, then it's a democratization of that idea that every single human being is in some way God's representative on the earth. So we have responsibility for carrying out God's oversight of creation, and that's what that image means. I have found that to be the most useful way of reading that, if not necessarily the only possible way of reading it.
No, I think that's so helpful, Bobby. And I think it's so helpful in this text in particular, because we've just had a whole section where we have sort of seen the way that God has gone about this project. And so as we get into this next part where humans are given a lot of power and responsibility, if you think about how do we carry this out in the image of God as sort of God's representative on earth, all the things that we've been talking about already in this chapter that God does or doesn't do, and all the things that God preserves and shifts around and invites and creates space for, like that's what I want to hold on to, is that we are the representative of that.
Yes. So I love that. So the first 5.5 days have been the kind of paradigm of what then humans are meant to be doing as God's image on the earth. Which to me implies the being in relationship, the respecting the creative capacity of animals, but also of the earth and of plants, and like inviting, being interwoven with, like all of those adjectives that we've been using this whole time, thinking about those now applied to human beings. That's really rich.
Yeah. I feel like we already have sort of gotten into the question then of what these verbs might get to, that, we should rule or master something or have dominion. Ellen Davis suggests the translation that we should have skilled mastery over these things. Is there more? And we've already talked a little bit about it. Is there more that you would want to say about those verbs?
Some people have read this as like people can do whatever they want to all of creation. And I think that is a mistake for a couple of reasons. One is the way we've been talking about the way God has been interacting. And if we're God's image, then that suggests we should interact the same. The other is that in verse 29, God says to human beings, I give you all the plants on the earth that yield seeds and all the trees whose fruit produces its seeds within it for food. And then animals, interestingly, are given grass to eat. So the image is that even like lions are eating grass. And so in this text, there is no violence. There's not even predatory animals eating other animals.
That's right.
There's definitely not human beings killing animals in order to eat them. That happens God gives permission to that after the flood in Genesis 9, when God has concluded that human beings are violent to our core. God says, fine, you can eat animals. And so any reading of this text would suggest we have the sort of right, or even the responsibility of like dominating in that sort of violent way, I think is just a wrong-headed reading of the text. I get why people read it that way, because we want to do whatever we want.
Yes.
But I don't think the text really can be read that way if you take it seriously as a whole.
Right. That all of this is in the context of a story where the creatures and the plants have a sense of abundance and renewing life, and you're trying to support and create space for that. The other thing that the food piece in particular made me think of, Bobby, and probably because we just finished I guess a little while ago we finished reading the gospel, but we talked about what it was for Jesus to have said, like, take and eat, this is my body. And we talked a lot about what it means to sort of eat of something, like, like how it connects you to the thing you're eating, very literally connects you, and how it connects you to others who are eating the same thing. this part here where it's like, remember all those seed-bearing plants that, that God created so carefully early in creation? Those are yours to eat. And like they become part of you. Like you are part of this system, and part of how the system supports itself and renews itself is, I don't know, it just gave me this really strong feeling of interconnectivity in the system.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
it's impossible to pull out one dominating force.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bobby, this has been an incredibly rich conversation, and we have not even talked yet about the seventh day.
Yeah.
I know that I want to talk about the seventh day in my sort of, classic end of podcast comments.
Yes.
So it'll be covered somewhat there. And I think that we're at the point where we need to step back and say, like,
Yeah, I think so.
What's feeling really pressing for you?
Yeah. So there's one piece of this text before you get to Sabbath that we have not quite talked about also, which is really important to me, which is that God has created human beings, but God has not yet called them good. And so we get it in verse 31, but it's not God's created human beings and said, that's good. It's God saw everything God had made. It was supremely good. So there's a sense in which God has seen creation and said, creation is good. And then God has seen creation with human beings in it and said, that is supremely good. That's very good. But human beings in and of ourselves do not ever get attributed a goodness. What I take from that is that we are seen to be good in relationship to the creation. When we are living out our God-given duty as the overseers and the tenders and the inviters and the co-creators and all of those things, the interwoven partners with creation, that's very good. Human beings, as you know, are quite capable of not living that way. And we forget what time it is. We erase the difference between night and day. We forget that we were meant to eat plants. And we don't pay attention to the well-being of the earth. We don't invite the earth. As you might talk about in a minute, we don't let the earth rest. And so we get out of place, and then the goodness of creation is endangered. Which we're going to talk about actually in a couple of weeks when we get to Leviticus. We're going to sort of talk about that much more directly. But to me, this is where this text is leading me, is God has created a world that when everything is in relationship is beautiful and supremely good. But as we were talking about before, there is yet still chaos water above the dome of the sky. And that goodness is not a given. It is a goodness that can fall apart. And so until human beings can recognize that we do have that responsibility as the image of God, as this text puts it, to tend to the sky and to the water and to the earth and to the plants and to the animals and live our life according to the seasons that are built into the natural order. And if we can't figure that out, the chaos waters can undo that whole thing. And so when I think about creation care, it's not this sort of like nice idea that we should, be nice to pets or whatever. It's like the whole everything.
I knew you hated pets.
There's a puppy. My colleague brought a puppy to the office today, and so I'm thinking about cute puppies right now. But there is this life and death sense that the whole thing can come undone if we do not care for it properly. And so it has beauty, and we have beauty, but only when we're in relationship. That is a hard thing to figure out how to live on a daily basis, but I think this text is inviting us to think about something like that.
I love that, Bobby. I love it. And it's also so convicting, but to really think about our role not as making nature work for us better. Right. And sometimes that's as good as we can get. Sometimes it's like, we've cut down too many trees in my neighborhood and now there's not enough shade and it's too hot to go for a walk.
Yep.
But in the ideal, we would have backed up that conversation way further back and said, like, what does it mean for the trees that our trees to be able to multiply, to be fertile? And do we, they have sort of an equal claim to the earth that
Yes.
humans do.
And maybe a prior claim.
A prior claim, right. We have a particular role in ensuring all the
Right.
claims are taken care of, but yeah.
I'm so curious what you're thinking and how you want to connect all this to the seventh-day Sabbath.
Bobby, I think it actually connects so easily to the seventh-day Sabbath because I'm talking a lot about rabbinic stories today, but here's another one. There's a question, why are humans created on the sixth day? And not like first thing in the morning on the sixth day.
Right.
Like you were created at like 3 p.m. on Friday,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And, some rabbis say it's so that we don't get too cocky, so we, realize all these other things were here before us. But the answer that I most like to that question is that the first thing, our first job as humans was to do nothing. Was like just to be in creation. And there's a rabbi of blessed memory named David Hartman who talks about Shabbat as the day that you can go out into the field and see the flowers and know that they are your equal. Like you can't pick the flower for your Sabbath table on Shabbat. You can't pick the flower. The flower has a right to be. And so thinking about getting humans to spend one day, their first day really on earth in that mode, I think is so important. And if we could get back to having some period of time every week that we revert to that, we're creatures. We are creatures that are part of creation and just sort of like take in all the intricacies of it and pay attention to the place where we are and see the diversity in the world around us. There are so many tools for good living that are in the biblical text, Bobby, that we just don't do.
Yes.
I just don't do.
Yeah. Amy, I love that so much. And of all the times I've read this text, and I have said human beings were created on the sixth day, the Sabbath is the seventh day, I had never made the connection that human beings' first day on earth was a Sabbath day. That is blowing my mind in some really, I don't know quite what ways yet, but that's something I love what you just did with it there, and I really want to think about that more. I love that.
We found new things to think about in a text that we have read 85,000 times. That's good.
It's true. Yeah, that's true. One of the things I like about these series that we're doing and people do is when you have a lens through which you're going to read the text, it focuses what you see instead of just like, let's talk about this text as a text. You see other things, but sometimes having a here's what I'm trying to notice really is helpful.
Here are the questions or lenses that I'm bringing to the text. Not as we have to have this outcome, but a lens, a filter.
Next week, we're going to be over in Job 38, which is one of the God speeches in the book of Job. And we're focused on things sort of skyward mostly, sort of on the sky and weather phenomena and things like that.
That is not a text that I have read before in the context of creation care. So I'm really excited to do that.
Yeah, me too. Who knows what we'll see in there?
Who knows what we'll see in there? All right, Bobby. Thanks for a great conversation. I'll see you next time.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Next week, we'll read a gorgeous and lesser-known meditation on the sky in the book book of Job, chapter 38. Until then, keep on digging.